I speak to them in parables because 75% are not going to get it. They're not planted in the right soil, let's say. And often it's not even their own fault. It's not even their fault. Often it's religious deception that keeps them from being planted in the right kind of soil. You see, Matthew 13 and verse 15, for these people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and should understand with their heart and should be converted, and I should heal them. Okay? Who is Jesus talking? He's talking about the 75%. He says, look, their heart is waxed gross, their ears are dull of hearing, their eyes they have closed. That's 75%. But blessed, notice this, Matthew 13 and verse 16. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. He was speaking to the 12 disciples, okay? That's the 25% that God is now working with, okay? Now, let me ask you a question. Does any of this sound like Jesus is building a mega church? Does this sound like he had a mega following? Well, I admit he did have a big following, but he managed to cut it down. He managed to cut it down. Why? Why did Jesus refer to his church as a little flock? That's Luke 12 and verse 32. Why? Well, I want to look at another issue here, another reason why. It's the story of the rich man and Lazarus, and it's at the end, the last, the verse here, Luke 16 and verse 30. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they would repent. This guy was worried about, his family members, his loved ones. And he said, look, they're not responding to anything. And I know what would work. I know what would work on my family member. If someone from the dead came back to life, they would listen. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you think it would take to get your loved one's attention? Well, maybe if someone was resurrected from the dead and spoke to him about the gospel, that would work. And Jesus said, Luke 16 verse 31, and he said to him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither would they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. This passage is absolutely amazing. Jesus did not say, if they won't hear me. He didn't say that. He points back to the Old Testament prophet and the law of God. If they will not hear that, then they're not going to hear me. Now, let me ask you a question. How many Christians do you know who pay no attention to the Old Testament? How many churches could you go to who would never even open it up? I mean, they wouldn't even blow the dust off their Bible as far as Old Testament is concerned. They only preach from the New Testament. And Jesus comes along and says, no. He points back and he says, now, it's not about hearing me. He didn't say if they won't hear me. He said if they won't hear Moses and the prophets, they're not going to hear me. Okay? All right, we're talking about the 25% who will hear, who do look back to the Old Testament prophets and the law. And we're talking about the 75% who don't. Okay? And that's the majority of, I would say, probably religious people.